Yes, so I think let's just get started. I would expect people to drop by as they wander through. This is on third floor. So let me introduce myself. So I'm Sandeep. I've been in the product management for last 10 years. I worked in large companies. Hello. Like Motorola, Time Warner. I've been in the Bay Area startup scene for a while. Currently I'm working at a startup called Sencha. So Sencha is a Sequoia-backed startup. Well, I've been with the Sencha for the last 3 years. Just got acquired, and we primarily develop web application framework, components, tooling, primarily for enterprise developers to develop web and mobile applications. So the reason for this talk is kind of understand what are the technical skills that a product manager needs, right? So primary aim for this talk is for you guys to kind of understand and appreciate what kind of technical skills are relevant, important for you to acquire as you get into the product management, particularly in the web and mobile space, and where can you focus and where can you kind of have maximum maximum appreciation so that you can have a better create better products. So one of the fundamental question is, and I just want it to be interactive, so stop me any point in time and we can have a conversation. So one of the fundamental question is why PM need technical skills, right? So typically product management is considered a combination of design, technology, business, strategy, kind of combination of those skills. And as long as you are really good in one or two of those skills sets, you can get in the product management. So I don't consider that not having technical skill an impediment for getting into the product management. But as you become a product manager and as you are managing products, particularly for technical customers who are technical in nature, you need to develop those technical skills. So for example, currently our customers are developer market, right? So developers are people kind of, they don't want to talk to you on the phone, right? So they want to be on the Slack, they want to be on the forum, they want to do everything online, but not really get on the call with you. So if you want to be, if you want to talk to them as a product manager and you want to understand more in real time, you need to have some kind of technical skills so that you can understand what they're talking about and can ask them right questions. The second thing is, second aspect of why you need technical skills while developing product is you want to develop a really good working relationship with your engineering managers and architects. And one of the fundamental reasons is that you can come up with your vision, features, and all the good things, but you need somebody to tell you, okay, is it feasible? What time it is feasible? Like in my previous projects, we are using agile methodology. And we had these 3 weeks of agile cycles. And I used to give between 5 to 10 features to my engineering manager. And there used to be a pushback saying me, okay, we can only do these 2 features because we have these 10 different things, technical debt or a few other things that we need to do. And so you need to have a good interaction model with your engineering manager's architect to understand what it would take for them to do this thing. And unless you have some kind of technical skills, it's very hard to have that interaction with them. And the third thing I would say is why you need technical skill is sometimes you may end up in a situation where you have to do more technical than what you're supposed to. So for example, I just mentioned my company, Sencha, got acquired. And when they got acquired, there was this void created where the engineering managers left, the engineering directors left. As a product manager, I still have this product map that I need to execute, and I need to have releases every week, every month. We promise this to our customers. And so I have a bunch of developers there on my product, so I knew that we can still execute, but then there was this gap because of lack of engineering management. And I have to now work closely with the developers to get that flow going. So for me, it was very important to understand what could be the steps where it can go wrong, right? And then work with the developers on execution. So how would you kind of understand what are the top technical skills that the product managers need? And the way to think about it is to think what the developers think are the top technical skills, right? And there are ways in which you can look at those. Look at analyst surveys, you can look at your own industry surveys or developer surveys. So in this presentation, I'll go a couple of surveys to see what are the prominent technical skills that developers think are important. So one very useful place that developers go to is, of course, Stack Overflow, right? Stack Overflow is a really great kind of Quora type site where developers can ask the question, but it's very well managed. So you don't really give your comments to it. You actually give solutions, right? So Stack Overflow is really useful in the sense that you ask certain question and you get exact answer. And so they conduct this survey. There's more than 100,000 developers who participate in this survey. They do it yearly. A lot of participation from Europe, but there's a large participation from North America. And if you look at who are those developers taking the survey, large number of those are backend developers, call them backend developers, full stack developers. Many of those are actually front-end developers if you look at from the right to left. The y-axis is it's an interesting axis. The more you go on the lower side of the y-axis, the more there are women doing this role versus men on the top side. But you see that there are product managers. So some product managers, they think like developers, and so they took this survey as well. So what came out of this survey is some of the popular technologies, right? So here are some of the technologies that these 100,000 developers think are important. So JavaScript, it definitely comes on top every year. I mean, it's not just this year. I went back and I've seen that JavaScript came out in the top for last 3 years. More than 70% of those said that it's a popular technologies, the HTML, CSS. And if you consider web page, right, or mobile web, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS are the fundamental building blocks of building any web page or any mobile page. Anything you do, you go on, do it on your desktop, tablet, and mobile, requires JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And then SQL, right? Means where you want this great application, web application, mobile application, where is the data coming from? And that's where the SQL comes in. So in my opinion, for a product manager, the top 4 are one of the key aspects, right? Those are the key aspects that, in a sense, everyone should know. The depth to know it is a bit different. And I will go in the JavaScript part a little bit more detail later on, but but as a product manager, you should appreciate the developments happening in each of these, right? Like JavaScript, as a language, is changing every year. So you need to understand and appreciate that. As a browser, it's changing not even every year, it's changing every day, every quarter. So as the application you are developing, you should think in terms of, okay, there are this my application is running on the browser, which is adding more and more features, and how can I make use of that? SQL, right? So SQL means the databases are changing, NoSQL and other aspects are coming as well. The remaining, I would think, is I will kind of give a lower priority for those kind of languages, though Python is really important if you're doing anything related to data science, big data, or the popular term AI here. In terms of libraries, many people say Node.js, Angular, React are some of the key frameworks and libraries. Though I would expect many of the companies here, they are also using .NET Core, particularly if they are using ASP like Microsoft technologies, or Spring if they are using Java technologies. These are some of the key things that as a product manager, you just need to aware about what are the capabilities of those. And I will go a little bit into understanding the Angular and React portion in the later parts. The databases, MySQL, SQL Server, PostgreSQL, SQLite, these are primarily SQL type of databases, right? So these are the ones where, as you understand the SQL or SQL, you can now have the capability to make the queries for any of these databases, irrespective of which one is used in your organization. The MongoDB is a NoSQL database. So it follows a different paradigm, but you can still use many of the queries that you learn and perform on the MongoDB as well. The popular development environments, the Visual Studio Code came out to be #1, and it's kind of surprising for many of the people who have never heard about it. It's free from Microsoft. So anybody can actually go and download the Visual Studio Code. It's very easy to use. First of all, it's free, is open source. It's also very lightweight, so you don't need really a development environment. And though it's lightweight, it comes with a number of extensions. So though it's written in JavaScript, the code itself, it has a number of extensions so that it supports multiple languages. The rest, I think the Visual Studio and others, you require license. So probably as a developer, you will get access to it, but may not be as a product manager. Version control. Now Git is kind of the standard here, right? So Git is one that you need to kind of understand what are the things in Git and GitHub. And I mentioned about the previously, right? So, in one of as my startup got acquired, there was this void in the engineering management. And what I understood that I had to really understand this Git flow, because as a product manager, I was more in Jira, right? So I was creating this Jira tickets and assigning to developers, right? So the developers know that they are working on this particular task or this particular feature, and you define the use case and you define the user scenarios and all that. But then they take those Jiras and they create a certain code base, right? So that code is in Git. And that developer works on that code. And then once they do the unit test and all that, once they are ready to submit the code, or the workflow is, they do what is called pull request. So they ask somebody, okay, I have my code ready, please pull my request. And it's typically known as pull request or PR. What was happening in my case was this multiple developers, there are probably 20 developers working on in multiple parts of the project. Each of them have kind of feature complete. And they have these PRs raised for that feature, which they think, okay, and they can show me, okay, see, I have this feature ready and it's working fine. But then there was nobody, because the engineering management is gone, nobody to actually look at and approve and review the PR so that it can be merged to the master code. So I have to actually go in the PR and see, okay, these are all these pending PRs that are nobody's looking at it, and I need to find some ways and have some developers be in the architect role so that they can actually look at the PRs, review it, and ask them for correcting and all that. So the workflow needs to be happening. And sometimes as a product manager, you need to be in a position to do that. So, and Git is the way. And GitHub provides a really great way for you to kind of look at the workflow of development. Now though these technologies are important, these are all part of clusters. So in an organization, you don't look at this top one. You typically have clusters of technologies. So there are these correlated technologies, right? So these clusters. So in an organization, you may have one cluster, okay, where your developers are really focused on JavaScript, and it could be full stack JavaScript. So you have your entire front end based out of React or Angular or one of those JavaScript framework, and then you have your back end or the server side also in one of the JavaScript based. So that's kind of the central part of it. And then you may be using all the kind of technologies, related technologies. So you may be using the MongoDB, which allows a better ways of JavaScript ways of doing it, or you may be using just a SQL and going through the route of using SQL Server or in the Azure and all that. Or there are certain technologies which are more Java focused. So you may have things which you are using the Spring and the Android and others Firebase. So you see that there are these clusters of technologies, and so it kind of depends on your understanding of your products and organization of which cluster I belong to, right? So which cluster my team and my product belongs to. if my team product have decided to go with this particular cluster of JavaScript, or this particular cluster of using Azure and Windows, or Java and Android and others. So then you need to go and understand those set of technologies, and it's kind of up to you on how much depth you can go in. But you need to know all those technologies so that you have a full understanding of that my product is not just a set of features, but set of these related technologies. And these technologies evolve at a very rapid pace. So my product and my features need to understand as those versions evolve. So there are 10 different things are happening here, right? In the central clusters, there are 10 different things that are getting evolved. So as I am having the product version and releases, I need to keep track of it, and more importantly, understand what those improvements each of these are giving me, and use those to improve your product. And then the other part of it is also, now I am in this cluster, I'm working this product in this organization, but then I really want to work into maybe in this area, because I think the AI is really cool, and I need to learn about Python and TensorFlow and all that. So as my learning objective, I can go and learn those set of other technologies. So that could be the work that you need to think about as you take your path of looking at new products and looking at new opportunities for yourself. So for the developer's point of view, if you ask the question what they hope to be doing in 5 years, right? So we are kind of looking into developer's mindset, just to understand the technical skills. So they think that, okay, maybe in 5 years I'll be in a totally different technologies or specialized technology field, right? So they are always in a search mode, searching for the new, latest and greatest technologies to learn, and so that they can do something specialized, something more, or found their own company. And in some cases, they could be working as a product manager, right? Around 6 to 7% of developers, they say that, okay, now I have some technical skills, and as I acquire the business, design, and marketing skills, I can move into that category. So I mentioned that JavaScript is kind of core, coming out to be core as many of these surveys. So let's talk a bit more about JavaScript. Right? So there was a separate survey done for JavaScript just to understand that landscape a little more clearly. So JavaScript, that language developed, as you probably know, it's like a 2-week project from Brandon Ike as he was developing Netscape browser, right? So it was like a very simple scripting language, and it has turned out to be totally different now, right? So you need to understand that there are people calling it different names to the JavaScript. First of all, JavaScript has nothing to do with Java, right? So it's a totally different language than Java. So when the Netscape actually gave the standard of how the language should evolve, they gave it to an organization called ECMA, which is a European Computer Manufacturing Association. So they call this language ECMAScript, right? And the ECMAScript language is the one where you are basically looking at different ways of JavaScript. So you are looking at the ES6. ES6 is a version of JavaScript that's currently defined as part of 2015. So when people think about JavaScript, and my project uses JavaScript, then it could be any of these. So it could be plain JavaScript, which is typically known as ES5, which has been around for a while. ES6, which was defined just a few years back. Typescript, which is what Microsoft invented. And then there are a few other types as well. So you will product manager, you will kind of come into across all these terms, right? There's these ES 2018, ES 2017, ES6, ES5. And the way to think about it, these are all the JavaScript standards from the ECMA standards group. So you have this bunch of new features that are getting added to to the language itself. Many of these developer language features, for you, what it means is it's improving your application, right? So improving your application, so application may work better, but there are some caveats to that, right? So as the language is evolving, there are certain browsers that may be supporting those language features, but there are certain browsers that may not. So for example, the Chrome browser, right? So Chrome browser is kind of the standard in a sense for every developer to use, and many of the, I think the penetration for the Chrome browser is probably more than 50% at this point for any users. But there are many organizations who are still using Internet Explorer and older browsers, and they may not be supporting all this. So there is a reason, there's a thing called transpilation, which is if your browser is not supporting it, then you probably need to support a way where you can do the transpilation and conversion to the browser code that's supported, right? So the Typescript is the one that I mentioned earlier. It's written by Microsoft, and the way it is trying to make the variable. It adds the variables to language, add object-oriented concepts to language used with Angular. For product manager to think about it is really it's making our code robust, right? So if you use Typescript, that's making the code robust. But now it needs additional things, right? Because the code, in a sense, before it runs in a browser, it needs to be transpiled. So there's additional steps that are involved. I talked about front-end framework, and the couple of things that came out of the top were React and Angular, right? So those are things that you kind of, as a product manager, need to know about it, aware about it. So React is one that's developed by Facebook. In the Bay Area, at least, it's the kind of number one at this point. Angular is been there for a while. It's developed by Google. It's kind of also the de facto standard across in the enterprise space. And then there are a bunch of more. There are a bunch of more other frameworks. So as your application on the web or on the mobile side, you need to have some kind of framework, because the JavaScript itself does not provide as many things that's needed to as your application gets complex. So you need to wait for a framework which will do where you can create your views, which is how you build your views or display part of it, and controller, which is how the users will interact with the application, and model is where the data comes in. And these frameworks allows you to do that model, view, controller parts for your application. So Angular is the one that's I said is a popular. Angular 1 is now called Angular JS, and then Angular has gone through a number of versions from 2 to 5, and they're simply now known as Angular. The one thing to know about it is the Angular 1 and Angular 2, there's a lot of difference between Angular 1. You need to have, it's totally different than Angular 2 and 2 to 5. It's written in TypeScript. Now, now your application using JavaScript and it's using Angular, is that enough for your application? But it's not really. You need to have a lot more things, capabilities that need to be added. And that's where these web applications and mobile applications get complex, because you need different, because this framework itself does not provide all the things. So you need to have ways to handle data, need to have packages to handle layout. Your team needs to develop the components themselves or get the components from third-party places. So React is the one which is the next one, which is very popular, and they focus on particularly the view aspects. The two key things that you need to kind of remember why React versus something else, there are two aspects. One is they call virtual DOM. Virtual DOM means, so DOM is a technical term just to say that, okay, when the browser is rendering some application, it's keeping it in a certain form, which is they call DOM, which is called Document Object Model. Right? So the Document Object Model is one that browser as a code understands and able to render it. Virtual DOM is something virtual, so something in the memory that React keeps. And so as you make some changes in your application, so user goes and types something or user does certain interaction, there's always a state change involved. And virtual DOM is very efficient ways of finding those changes and moving those into actual DOM so the browser updates it. So for a user, it's very seamless or very performant. If you remember the olden days where you see those flickers happening on on your pages. Here you have tens of hundreds of interactions happening, and you don't see any changes on the entire browser. So virtual DOM is one of the key important aspects. JSX is another one. So you all know that writing HTML is much more simpler than writing JavaScript, right? So you writing H1 or H2 tags is much simpler than writing JavaScript, understanding those syntax. And JSX is a way where the developers can use the HTML type of syntax to write it. So for a product manager, using JSX means you can have a kind of developers who could be really productive. Again, many of the capabilities, even though you use React, you still need to have a number of other libraries. And the number of other libraries are needed because you need to have API and state management. So many times your applications are actually hosted somewhere outside, right? Somewhere on the server. And you need a way to get those data. And that's where the understanding of APIs come into picture. So for product managers, you need to know, okay, what are the APIs that our application is using, and what are the ways in which it's using. REST API tends to be the most popular ways. So your application may be creating their own REST APIs and providing as part of the server to be consumed. Or you may be using many other API that is provided, for example, from Google, Facebook, Salesforce, or many more. There are other standards that are happening all the time. For example, GraphQL is a way where you can specify a particular query. So instead of REST, which is very much protocol in the sense of not keeping the state. So if you want to add an employee, you do the HTTP post. You want to get the employee, you do HTTP get or put, patch, delete, those kind of operations. In the GraphQL, you have a more better way of representing what you want to query. So your UI, you can kind of think about your UI and think about your GraphQL query and get that information from your API servers. So in case of web APIs, you kind of need to understand that there's a JSON aspect, which is a JavaScript object notation of how you want your data to be represented, and REST, which is how your APIs are getting used. In case of backend, for the JavaScript side, the Express is one of the key framework that's used, right? So you have, I mentioned in that particular cluster of JavaScript, you have this node and you have this Express. So Express is typically the topmost backend framework that is used, where you can handle this request coming in. So as your browser, as your application makes a call, the Express is kind of one of the most popular framework to handle it. You may be hearing about these terms, MERN or mean, and those kind of frameworks, right? So these are a way to say, okay, my application is using this particular stack, and this kind of entire stack, right, for your full application. So mean may be MEAN, means it's MongoDB. Express is the framework that they're using. A is the Angular, and N is the node, which is server side. Or MERN, which is instead of Angular, you're using React. So these are kind of popular ways in which the developers talk to each other, right? So they talk to, okay, I have a mean application, or I'm using mean stack, which I'm using MongoDB, Express, Angular, or I'm using the MERN, which is MongoDB Express with React and Node. And the key part of it is it's a full stack. So any developer who has JavaScript experience can now develop the entire application from front end to the back end, right? One of the key things you also need to kind of understand is the testing part. So as the developer is developing the code, one of the most important thing that he's also doing is writing the unit test. And there are a couple of terms that are being used. There's also called test-driven development, or BDD is a behavioral driven development. So in a sense, think about, like in the product manager, we are used to writing the use cases, user scenarios, And the same use case user scenarios, the developer is thinking in terms of testing. And they are writing those scenarios as a test cases. And typically you want them to write those test cases at the same time they're writing the actual code. And those could be written in any of these languages, like for JavaScript, Jasmine is one of the popular testing framework. So you write that in Jasmine, and typically the workflow, the way it happens is we have this continuous integration kind of environment where as they write these test cases, those test cases get automatically executed as the new build happens. Right, so that, and you need to, as a product manager, you kind of need to understand that flow, because once they wrote these unit test cases based on your user scenarios, that means that each time you have new release happening, those thousands of test cases are getting executed. So you have kind of confidence, okay, that I have this new release happening next week, but as long as the CI workflow is happening, those unit test cases are getting executed, so I don't need to worry about any regression or anything happening here.
So using Jasmine enables the developer to do the testing automatically, so there is no user involved in doing any kind of clicks or?
Yeah, so Jasmine is one of the unit testing framework, right? So here you write the test cases, okay? So your user scenario could be add an employee and make sure that employees, whatever the birth date is required field, right? And then the developer will go and write the test cases saying that if the birth date is not there, reject that, or things like that, right? So this, they are going to write that, and then there is a workflow involved. So there's a continuous integration workflow involved. So if somebody writes the code, it will test against that, and at the time of build, and if that particular code does not test that, it will fail, and then they have to go back and redo it, right? So as a product manager, you will know that there is the tests are getting executed. So there is a little bit more than just supporting Jasmine. You need to have a continuous integration environment so that your unit tests are getting executed, right? So and typically those are systems called TeamCity or Circle CI, or these continuous integration environments, which allows building of your project as well as executing unit test. So one of the things, the styling, right? I mean, as a product manager, styling is very important. It means we work closely with the designers. And the output of any design job is we probably may be working on the balsamic or sketch or working with the designers just for review. But ultimately, as an application, it boils down to either CSS or SAS or one of those one of those styling that goes ultimately in the browser, so the browser can render it. Couple of things that we need to kind of really know about it is the paradigms, right? There are adaptive design and responsive design. So adaptive design means your application, as you are writing it, could be used in different devices, right? It could be used on a desktop, on your Chrome browser. It could be used on your tablet in Safari browser. It could be used on your Android phone in that browser. Or each of these there's a technologies to package this, right? So the technologies to package it on the phone side, those technologies are called Cordova. So you take, in a sense, you take those web applications that bundle as a Cordova. So for you or as a user, it feels like a native application, but it's really a web application. Or there's another technology from GitHub called Electron, which means that you are creating these web applications and you just wrap it in Electron. And for users who are using it on Linux or Windows or Mac, they think it's a normal native desktop app, but it's really a web app, right? So web app does not really mean that it's always users are using on the browser. They could be using as an app on either the phone or desktop or on the tablets. So adaptive design is a paradigm where you want to think about that the same thing that you want on a desktop may not be useful on the phone side. So let's take a case of a stock market kind of application where you may, on the desktop side, you may want to show maybe 12 charts at the same time, right? Because you have a big desktop and you want to show it. But maybe on the phone, on the same application, you just want to have a simple list view, which is you just want to show, okay, what is the current price for that stock right now, and not really show the entire graph, right? So that's a design methodology called adaptive design. So in a sense, it's the same code base, but then you change the code base based on your device, and so that code will get a little bit modified based on whether it's on the phone. Then instead of showing the multiple graph or a grid view, the developer will change it to a list view. So that's one paradigm. The other paradigm is called responsive design. And you may have seen this just on the desktop side, right? As you change the browser size and change it to make it smaller, the application changes, right? So application, instead of being a 3-column, may become 2-column and may just become 1 column as you go and change the size of the browsers. So that's called responsive design. So the application is resizing and repositioning it. And for that, it typically, some of the newer paradigms, CSS3 and others, they handle it. Many of the newer frameworks can handle it. And many of the newer applications have both adaptive and responsive design. Build tools is something to keep eye on. Typically, that's something that you may or may not interact with the engineering operations team or developers to do it, but sometimes you may need to work with your developer, DevOps or others. NPM is really the standard in this case. So what is NPM? NPM is a node package manager. Okay, so it's think about it. It's like a huge repository. So 650,000 packages that are out there, right? These are open source JavaScript code packages. Most of them are really free. So when you think about, okay, this is your new applications, and your new application requires 10 different things to do. One of them could be, let's say, it needs security and needs some kind of cryptographic way of encrypting it. You can just go in NPM and see that there are already all these NPM packages. So your developers don't need to come up with the new ways of creating encryption. They can just use one of the open source cryptographic library that's out there. Similarly, if you think about it for security, API, for styling, there are already a bunch of really good code packages already out there. And what that really means for you as a product manager is if you have some understanding of that, then you can talk with them and tell them, okay, that there is something out there, right? So you can accelerate development of your product quickly because you know that there are things out there. And it may happen that, your team needs to develop something differentiated, but they can make use of some of the things which is already out there. Now, if you go into a little bit more details, then there are a lot of things that are happening, like there's transpiler, polyfills, and source map and all that. The thing to kind of here to understand is not all browsers are same. So as you develop your web applications and all that, you need to kind of think about it's not the same everywhere. The Microsoft Internet Explorer is quite different than Microsoft Edge. It's quite different than Chrome. It's quite different than Firefox. But then there are technologies out there which are transpilers or polyfills, and what they do is they try to add some kind of a way where your browser provides a kind of similar level of functionality as any other browser. So as a product manager, you can say that, okay, my web application can run on Chrome, can run on Firefox, can run on Edge, but then by using all this, the transpiler polyfills functionality. On the mobile side, so it's a different world as such. Means even in the JavaScript, it's kind of it's a different world. I mentioned a couple of names here, right? So I mentioned about Electron, which is a way you can take this application and it's really for desktop, but it can run on kind of mobile computer in a sense. But then PhoneGap or Cordova is a way, or Ionic is a way where you can take your web application and really create a native applications out of it. React Native is one of the key new framework, or new means it's been around for like few years now, but which is something which provides a way where you can use the React like a JavaScript, but really map down to actual mobile components on iOS and Android. So those are things to keep eye on. The progressive web application. So this is a term that's getting very popular, and you kind of need to understand a little bit on this. Is on the mobile side, there are kind of a couple of ways you can users can use the applications, right? Typically, they go to the App Store and download the application, or they can go to the browser and go to the particular web application. What we are seeing is, on an average, a user is downloading less than one app per month, versus they are actually accessing more than 50 website or web application on the browsers. So there is a large difference between what users are ready to do it on the browser versus what they are ready to download as an application on their phone. And there could be multiple reasons to it. Maybe the users are not really comfortable downloading the application, because now you know that once you download the application, they really know everything about you, versus they do it on the web application and you have this sandbox that protects your data. Or it's basically a hurdle for somebody to download the application, right? So the progressive web application is a way where the web application that typically you access it on the web are behaving more and more like a native application. And so the product manager, you can think about it is, can our application be a progressive web application? It's very important for, particularly in the emerging markets. That's because they have lesser speed and all that. But even in the markets like this, because there is a high hurdle rate for people to actually download applications, these progressive web applications are becoming important. And so here the user behavior is like, you go to that applications, and for example, 800 flowers, or I think that particular application is a progressive web application. So when you go to that 800 flowers to order flowers, it basically tells you, okay, it can add an icon on your home screen. It prompts you to add icon. And so that once that icon is there on your home screen, it opens up like a native application, and it does something which is things like caching certain data on your device without actually you having to download a new application. And what that means is, since you have ability to cache the data, you can work in offline mode. So if you are in an area where there is no mobile coverage, your application may still work, even though it's a really web application. So that's something that to think about as a product manager is do our application needs to be also progressive web application. The last topic, and which is very important, is really the web security, right? So any web and mobile product manager without understanding web security is very hard to launch it. Because there are so many threats out there, right? So the threats that are out there could range anywhere from web scraping, which is a way where somebody, you have really great application that you took 1 year to launch, but then somebody can just go and scrape all your data and create another application which is almost a duplicate of your application, right? So you need to be understand that all your work can go out once you open up your application. Or something like credential stuffing, which means that as you have seen, there are a lot many leaks of data out there, right? There is a leak from Target, Equifax. So there is a dark web out there who has credentials that we use. So there are these automated bots out there who takes the credentials from the dark web and then try to stuff it in any possible application or any new application. So you can think about, as you launch your application, you will get those credential stuffing attacks, which is these bots which will use those credentials and try to attack your application and see if they can get in. the denial of service attack, which is a way where they push a lot of traffic so that your applications, some of your applications services can go down. There's also cross-site scripting, which means that if you have some input form or forum comments, the hackers can write some scripts which can propagate back to your database, and if you haven't handled that correctly, it can go back to your browser, and those scripts can run. So you need to kind of, as a product manager, understand that these threats are out there, these threats are real, and if something happens to web applications, it could be do and die, right? So it could mean that your applications can die if you haven't thought about all those possibilities of this happening and having immediate correction mechanism, because if such attacks happen, you need to respond very quickly. And really the reason, the way to way to prevent it is to take all the precautions as you develop your applications. Work closely with your engineering team on that. So that's the web security. So I think I will, as I see, I'm at a 45-minute time period. So I'll just stop here and see if there are any questions or anything I can, any questions that you guys have. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how far can you, probably, anyway, let me just ask you the question. So how far, give us a broad aspect of things, what you should know as a product manager. But of course, you can't dive very deep into that, all of them. So how do you still ensure to be on top of the game so that you have that empathy towards the developers and what's happening in their work?
Yeah. So I think in a sense, you need to kind of think about your kind of understand your product, right? It means ultimately, it's part of it as a product manager is to understanding your customers and the product. But as a product manager, you also need to understand what it is made up of, right? So you need to think about whether you can identify particular spots in your application which your application is actually using, right? So you can create your own list of things, that the top 10 things that I need to worry about or I need to know as a technologist since my application is using it, right? And then look at the corresponding ways where they can interact, right? And then acquire the knowledge base. The parts which are very important are kind of the technologies which are mentioned here, the styling, the development tools, the security. These are the top big portions, and then go deep down and look at the technologies of each of those. You may not use in every day as part of your product management, but as you are meeting with the engineering, you ask these questions, and these engineers are really the ones who will provide you the actual concise ways of information. Otherwise, instead of you going research, I think the working with engineers and being in a good relationship with them helps you understand it much better than anything else.
Can I just ask you a question about, and it's kind of half a question and half a statement. Mm-hmm. I'm skeptical, just to hear your experience and reaction. If I'm a product manager and I'm worrying about what kind of source repository my engineering team is doing, I become a helicopter parent for my engineering team, and I'm not doing my job. I'm trying to do engineering's, the project manager or program manager's job in engineering while not doing my job. And it's important to have a common vocabulary, with technical vocabulary with my engineering team, which may be separate from customers. Mm-hmm. But I have found that if I may have the knowledge that if I step over the line, I'm going to damage my relationship with the engineering team, especially the management of the engineering team, director, project manager, whatever. Any feedback on that? I've
Yeah.
had a bad experience with that.
No,
where I tried to help.
No, this is really great, yeah, because there are some engineering managers, and if you kind of show them, okay, I have some skills to understand what they may get offended because they think, okay, that's their turf, right? They want to be the responsible for managing all the source code, GitHub, and all that. So for product manager, it's really about understanding how you can create a working relationship which would be beneficial, right? So typically, the things that as you interact with your engineering management, the term that comes a lot is technical debt, right? They tell you, okay, that I cannot do this feature because I need to take this particular infrastructure, move it to this version, take this to React, or take the Angular to move it to Angular 2, and all that, right? So it's first of all, it's kind of appreciating what they mean by that technical debt, because that's going to impact your product offering. But second thing is sometimes you need to kind of push back, right? Push back to them on whether they need to do it right away or whether the customer features are more important, right? So so many times it's kind of a negotiation, right? So you now know that okay, their thinking is they have this 10 different technical tasks that they want to accomplish as part of ongoing product development, and you have this 10 different customer-facing tasks, right, which you want to accomplish. And they are separate tasks, and you have only certain set of developers, certain set of time set in which to offer it. And how you can come up and join with your engineering management so that you can pick the top 3 or 4 from their list, top 3 or 4 from your list, and bring that as part of the product. So for you, it's
But that's features in a product which may be different from the actual implementation technology.
Yeah. But as they learn about the implementation technologies and as they are evaluating the implementation technologies, you kind of need to be in the room with them, right? Because as a product manager, it has a lot of importance as you select the technologies. You are in a sense bound to it for a long period of time. It's not easy for once you select a particular technology, you go with Angular. You can't just move to React in 2 months time frame, right? Then it's a huge effort. In a sense, you have to stop all your features happening for maybe 6-month period or whatever. If they decided, okay, from Angular we are going to switch to React. So when they make such a decision, as a product manager, you should be in the room. You may not have that many important input in the decision making, but you at least understand and bring to them that kind of understanding that as how long that effort is if they happen to change it. Good question.
This is interesting talk. It'd be very interesting to hear and have this in the context of product lifecycle.
Product lifecycle, yeah.
As a product manager.
Yeah.
Have to deal with.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you.